Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and finish this up. I ain't going to waste your time, so let's go ahead and get started with this. So when we're talking about American culture, like I mentioned in class, you have to kind of think about it as looking at the culture of America as a whole, not any one particular group. Different groups in society will be affected by the overall culture of the time period. And we're looking at the Great Depression. This is a time period that's going to be marked by trauma, by lack of confidence. People, they want comfort in society. And I think that's one of the reasons why American culture as a whole is really going to kind of confirm and reinforce those traditional values that we've been talking about for so long in terms of what our identity as Americans are. You know, the hot dogs, apple pie, baseball, lemonade, you know, all that stuff that we think about that's so American and what makes us us. This hard work ethic, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You know, these are the things that are gonna continue into the 1930s, and that's part of our American culture as a whole. And I think that what happens for various groups of people in society is going to be reflected by this overall culture. When we look at our values, I don't think our values are really going to differ that much from, you know, from the Gilded Age to the Progressive Era to the 1920s to the 1930s. I think our values were really largely established way before this time. Let me move myself. There we go. So like I said, I think our values have been established for a really, really long time. I think they've adapted over the years, and I think that, you know, looking at this first bullet point here, that definitely that one of the things that the 1920s brought is that we are a modern nation, and as a modern nation, what do we value? We value affluence, we value materialism, we value consumerism, but we still believe in this idea that we control our fate, that we are in the position that we are in because of hard work or lack of hard work. And I think, you know, during the Depression, that's why you have so many people who felt such trauma and lack of confidence, because we as Americans, we believe in success. And when so many people lost their jobs, and like this guy right here, they're basically relegated to selling apples on the corner. That's embarrassing. It's a sense of shame. But on the other hand, this is moving forward. You know, this bottom point right here, the belief that one could restore themselves, and that we have this success ethic that has always been with us, that hard work, talent, ingenuity, these are the things that are going to push and propel us forward. And I think that, you know, because we believe that when you look at a lot of the pictures that I've shown you of the Depression, and, you know, continue to think about that as we move forward, but these pictures, you look at these people and, you know, it kind of looks like it's not that bad. Well, that's because people were embarrassed. They were shameful of the situation that they were in. And they want to give the appearance that everything is okay. You know, they're not going to sit there and wallow in self-pity, because that American ideal, that value of hard work. If I have to sell apples on the corner, I'm going to freaking sell apples on the corner. If I have to go pick tomatoes in a field, then that's what I'm going to do, because that's our values as Americans. That hard work. So like I said, sometimes when you look at some of these pictures and stuff, it's kind of hard to directly see the effects of the Depression, because people are trying to move on, and I think that's a positive thing. You know, the unemployed, they hid. They were ashamed to show their personal failure. So a lot of these people, like I said, they're going to do whatever they can. They're going to take whatever work that they possibly can, because at least they're doing something, they're working, because that's how they're going to pull themselves up from their own bootstraps. Now, there are going to be many people, and don't get me wrong, who are going to be so ashamed of their situation that they hide this in kind of a different way by actually physically leaving the situation. So we have men who leave their families because they're so ashamed that they can't provide for their families. Suicide rates are going to go up as well. This is really sad, actually. There are stories of many husbands who lie to their wives. You know, they get up in the morning just like any other day. They get up, they get ready for work, they say they're going to work, and then they just wander around town. And they don't really have a job. And so they wander around, they try to find work, and then they come home. And again, they're trying to hide this because of their shame and embarrassment over the situation. And again, understand that a lot of these people, they're not looking for any type of handouts or anything. They really want to work. Okay, and I think that's important once we get to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs. You know, the number one thing that Roosevelt's going to want to do is to put people to work. And that's what's going to bring back, I think, that confidence and to set aside the trauma that came as a result of the Depression. Now, I think it is important to note that we will have somewhat of a shift in terms of values. These core values that I'm talking about are always going to remain. Okay, I really think even today that we believe in that we don't want handouts, that we believe that we attain our positions because of that hard work, talent, and ingenuity. However, what we will begin to see, and this is really going to come as a result of Franklin Roosevelt and his New Deal programs, that, you know what, maybe it's not all my fault. Maybe the way this system was set up, you know, this overly capitalist system that creates such imbalance of wealth, that maybe that's really what the problem is, that there needs to be more government interaction, that the government really does need to play some type of a role in the welfare of its citizens. You know, and hopefully that sounds kind of familiar because we talked about that with progressivism. So we're going to see that while people still believe that fundamentally what's going to get them to be successful is going to be their own hard work, that maybe the government needs to play some type of a role, especially in a time that's so drastic like the Great Depression. You know, perhaps we need to have some type of a collective response, that this is not just something that I deal with. This is not just something that my city government deals with, my state government, that this is something that everyone needs to work together on. And when the Depression hits in 1929, remember Herbert Hoover is president at the time, and he's going to continue, for the most part, his philosophy of laissez-faire. So at the depth of its depression in 1932, you still have Herbert Hoover, for the most part, still having that laissez-faire type of an approach. So the government is not really going to be taking a significant role. Not until Franklin Roosevelt becomes president. But what we will see is we will see this idea, this kind of changing value, that there needs to be more of a collective response that's not just the fault of the individual for the situation they find themselves in. We're going to see artists, writers, thinkers, that they're the ones that are going to be putting out there that it's not just your fault. So that kind of makes sense, and I don't know if you guys know anything about artists, but artists tend to be more so on the liberal side of the political spectrum. So when you listen to like a lot of music, especially like in the 1960s, it's very much so criticizing the government, pushing for civil rights, pushing to get out of Vietnam, for instance. So music kind of reflects what goes on in society for that time period. And that holds true with the arts and literature as well. So I think it's these artists that are really kind of taking this kind of more of a different viewpoint, that it's not just the fault of the individual. So let's go ahead and look at the arts and intellectual thought. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this, to be honest with you, because it's really not that important in the scheme of things, but it is interesting nonetheless. when it comes to artwork, the art becomes very realistic, and realism is really the main art form of the time period. They're really trying to show exactly what they see. They're trying to document in painting what they see during the Depression. And I'm not sure who did this painting, but I think that it's a good example of realism during the Depression. You guys have probably all have seen this lovely painting. This is called American Gothic, and it was painted by a guy named Grant Wood in, I believe, right around 1930 or so. I like this painting to kind of illustrate some interesting ideas of just thought during the Great Depression. The house in the background was modeled off of a house in the state of Iowa, and the style of architecture on the house is called American Gothic. That's why the painting is called American Gothic. And from my understanding, the construction of these, they're called Carpenter style American Gothic, that they were kind of cheap and not really meant to last. And, you know, and I think about that with the Depression and a lot of the shanty houses that are going to be popping up. Again, not really made to last. Of course, this house is way nicer than any shanty. The people in front of the house, the artist, Grant Wood, he used his, I think it was his sister, if I'm not mistaken. And I do know that the guy here was actually his dentist. Kind of bizarre. I don't know. But he was trying to kind of show the ridiculousness of his situation. That, you know, here you have this kind of cheap house in the background, and you have these like prim and proper people in front of it, like I'm something special or whatever. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, it's just, you know, it's ridiculous. We're looking at a time period where people are suffering and being all prim and proper, and it's kind of it's a critique, I think, of American culture overall, and the confining aspect of American culture, especially in the 1930s, because we will talk about like censorship, government censorship, like on films and things like that. It's a very confining type of society culturally in the 1930s. You can see, like, in terms of the arrangement and stuff, everything's like super close together and claustrophobic, and it's kind of poking fun at the whole small town Midwestern America. So, I don't know, I think it's kind of a cool painting. I know it's something that most of you guys have probably seen. But again, this is an example of realism. It's also a style of another type of painting during the time period called regionalism. So this is like the Midwest region. So you had different painters painting what different regions were like. I'm clicking, but nothing is happening. Oh, there we go. Just making sure. Alright, another thing, and I talked about this a couple days ago, that photographers are going to be employed by the Farm Security Administration, which was a New Deal program put in place by Franklin Roosevelt, helping to deal with farming issues, but also to put people to work. And one of those jobs was to send out documentary photographers to go and document what rural America was all about in the Depression. So people like Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange, there's Eudora Welty, I think I have some of her photos in here. They're kind of like the muckrakers from the Gilded Age / Progressive era, who were trying to expose a lot of the problems that were going on in society so people could see this, and then they could understand, like in this situation, why the federal government might want to provide low-cost loans, might want to actually pay farmers to not produce, and that was an actual program that we'll talk about on another day. So trying to get Americans to really understand the situation of farmers and to get that support for federal relief programs for rural people. And these are just some photographs. This photograph is one of Walker Evans' more famous photographs. Again, very much so just realism. This is what the situation is. Again, very similar to Jacob Riis and How the Other Half Lives, and how he was documenting the situation for the mostly the immigrants of the Lower East End of New York City. These are some African Americans outside of a barbershop. I think this one was Walker Evans as well. And now we're getting into, this is one of Dorothea Lange's photographs. And then I already showed you this and told you the story about this, but Dorothea Lange had come across this lady and her 3 children, and she asked if she could photograph them. And this was one of the photographs that was chosen to be the cover of Time magazine. And it really, I think, adequately depicts the despair of the rural migrant workers who were pretty much roaming the country trying to get by. Some people criticize this photograph because they say that Dorothea Lange staged it, so it wasn't natural. Like if you go back to this Walker Evans photograph, this was not staged. I mean, other than, you know, hey, can you guys sit down so I can take a picture? But this was kind of staged for just the composition of it, the artistic aspect, but I think it also, the way everything is situated, that it, you know, the way the kids are, it pulls at your heartstrings a little bit more than maybe just a, you know, her sit next to your mother. And more photographs. Again, we're just documenting the rural experience. These last set of photographs is from a photographer. She was also a really good poet, and her name was Eudora Welty, and she photographed people in the South. This photograph always struck me because of the condition of this girl's legs, and I don't know if this is what's going on, but again, you had so much malnutrition and disease going on. You know, people without vitamin C and other essential minerals and vitamins. You know, you can get things like scurvy, you can get rickets. I mean, there's all kinds of different diseases that people could have just purely due to the fact that they were not eating properly. I just really like this because she just looks badass to me. It's like you see her walking down the street and you're like, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, yeah. Suck it to him, suck me. You know that song by Aretha Franklin? Yeah. Good stuff. But yes, I really like that picture. Just a strong African-American woman. Alright, here's something that's really important for you guys to note and to jot down, is that when we're looking at popular culture of the 1930s, you know, when people are going out for entertainment, in the 1930s, entertainment really is about escapism. You know, people, they don't necessarily want to go out to a movie and see more about people who are living in a state of depression. Okay? People want to be entertained. Now, having said that, there will definitely be social commentary films and books and all of that. But for the most part, we're looking at escapism. People want to escape the misery that they live in. And they want to go watch a movie. They want to listen to music. They want to dance. And they want to have fun. You know, and I think that's that 1920s culture that is continuing into the 1930s, is a sense of entertainment and fun and leisure. And I guess you could even probably go back to the Gilded Age when we started to see demands for that kind of stuff. But in the 1930s, I think we're really looking at escapism. I mean, who doesn't want to go see The Headless Girl? You know what? Seriously? The Headless Girl, probably her situation is a hell of a lot worse than my situation. At least I have a head. I'm such a dork. Alright, radio. So you guys already know a little bit about radio and the 1920s. Well, again, this is going to continue into the 1930s. And we're continuing to create and spread a national mass culture. By the end of the 1930s, or sorry, by the end of the 1920s into 1930, almost every family is going to have a radio. And when you're looking at the most popular type of radio shows, they were things like comedies. A serial would be like something that would be on Wednesday every single week for, you know, the whole season. So it's a serial, you just keep following it. week after week. A soap opera is actually kind of a form of a serial, because with soap operas you have an ongoing story. Soap operas tended to be every day. I mean, at least they were on every day, like on TV. So I assume it was the same way for radio. But soap operas, I mean, these were largely about really outlandish stories about relationships. You know, again, knowing that your relationship with your spouse may not be fantastic during the Depression, you know, again, looking at soap operas and just the web tangle of mess that you see with relationships, I think it kind of makes you feel better that, you know what, maybe my relationship isn't so bad. Music, so popular. The type of music that people were listening to was still jazz, and then a variety of jazz called swing, and I'll play you some of that in a little bit. And then we've got news events, sports events, and I'll share a couple stories of those in a few minutes as well. But again, that key point, just like in the 1920s, we're looking at the 1930s, bringing the radio as a means of bringing the nation together to create a common culture. And again, because everyone is touched by the Great Depression, you know, hearing stories and in news programs and things like that, it gives you a sense of comfort because you're not the only one going through it. And Franklin Roosevelt, when he becomes president, he is a master at using radio. You know, it was literally, they called them fireside chats, and he would give these radio broadcasts every week, and he'd be talking about, this is what I'm going to do, everything's going to be okay. And you know, people likened it to having like your favorite uncle sitting on the couch next to you, just kind of chit-chatting with you. So bringing the nation together, that we can get through this and everything's going to be fine. And then also the escapism, especially with the comedies, the serials, the soap operas. So this is a selection of the more popular comedies from the 1930s. People you probably have never heard of. Jack Benny, George Burns and Gracie Allen. George Burns was an actor, like, I think he died probably in the 1980s, and he did a couple of films where he played God, and I think the film was just called Oh God, if I'm not mistaken, and John Denver, if you know who he is, was in it. Funny film. All right, Amos and Andy is kind of interesting. So Amos and Andy, comedy show. Minstrel shows are still around, but obviously on the radio, you can't, well, really, there's no necessity, I guess, to do the blackface. So Amos and Andy was essentially sort of like a minstrel show, but on radio. So they didn't dress in blackface, but they were doing all of the same stereotypes and making fun of African American people. It was very, very bad. You can probably find some examples of these on YouTube or, I don't know, any other radio type of medium that you have. I don't know, you might be able to find it on Napster or something like that, I'm not sure. These are some of the more popular serials that were shown or broadcasted on radio. The Shadow, I'm going to keep moving myself around here. The Shadow was like a detective type of a program. In the middle is Dick Tracy, who was also a detective, and that was later turned into actually I'm not sure what came first, if it was a comic or a radio show. I'm not really sure, but Dick Tracy was a very famous comic, just like Superman. Superman was a really famous comic, and then that was turned into a radio show. And then one of the most popular radio shows, especially for kids, was The Lone Ranger. Lone Ranger. I used to watch that actually when I was a kid. It used to be on TV, and it used to be like on these like old PBS type channels, and I used to watch the old versions of this. Never listened to the radio programs though. And when it comes to TV, by the way, I haven't really talked about TV yet because TV is not really a thing. I know that television was invented, at least some form of television. I think it was in the 1920s, but it's not any type of television that was used in homes or anything like that during this time. That won't really come until post World War II. And then we got Glenn Miller. So swing music. Like I said, swing was the most popular form of jazz during the time period. So I thought I would play, just kind of play a little piece. I'm just going to use my phone here, so hopefully this kind of picks up. I'm sure most of you guys have heard this song, In the Mood. So let's all get in the mood. One more time. Alright, so that's a little swing. Swing will actually continue into the 1940s as well. What else we got? Alright, also, so going back to music, I just said swing. So when it comes to radio, swing music, jazz music, classical music, it's going to be broadcasted all across the country. And again, jazz was the most popular form of music for the time period. And again, that music, I think I talked about this in the last unit, but it really was considered quote-unquote jungle music, the devil music. It was the rock and roll of its time period, and a lot of older folks, they had issue with it. A lot of your traditionalist culture, your fundamentalists, they had issue with it. So this was really the music of kids, of the youth of the time period. But again, it was spread nationally on the radio. So this was the predominant music that most younger people listened to throughout the country. And then with radio, you also had sporting events, so you could listen to the World Series, and you could in the comfort of your living room enjoy listening to Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And actually, I'm not sure if Lou Gehrig was around in the 1930s or not, but I'm just kind of stretching because I'm not sure who the big baseball players were in the 1930s. You have the Oscars. People were like really enamored with celebrities in the 1930s. Classic story. Oh, and you know what? I don't have my album. I'll have to show it to you guys during class, but I have this album. It's a broadcast of Orson Welles and his rendition of War of the Worlds. So this is a great story, actually. So Orson Welles is freaking amazing, first of all. He's a director, he's an actor. He did one of my favorite films of all time called Citizen Kane. Most of you guys wouldn't like it, but it's an American classic. I can't recommend it enough. Anyways, so Orson Welles, as a Halloween joke, what he decided to do was to take H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds, which is a novel, and to read it as a radio broadcast. Now, if you guys have seen the film with like Tom Cruise, or maybe you've read the book War of the Worlds, that you would understand that the book is an account of aliens coming and assaulting Earth. So, as a Halloween joke, Orson Welles goes to the radio station and says, "Hey, I'm going to do this." And he actually does broadcast. He says, "Look, this is not real. I'm actually going to be reading from H.G. Wells's book, War of the Worlds. So it's not real." So he starts to do this thing, and he's amazing. He's just an amazing actor. So he's reading, and he is like putting it out there that there are aliens that are they're coming and they're taking over. And people were listening to this on the radio, and a lot of them, they tuned in like in the middle of it. So they didn't hear the beginning where it was like, oh, this is me reading from H.G. Wells's book or anything. To most of these people, they were like, oh, fudge. We're being invaded by aliens. So people freaked out. They got in their cars. Well, they like put all kinds of stuff in suitcases. They threw their suitcases in their cars. They got on the highways. And the highways, I'm not even kidding you, there were like bumper to bumper because people were trying to get the hell out of there. I don't know where they were going to go if the Earth was being invaded by aliens, but it was crazy. And I know that he had to give like an informal apology and stuff like that, and it was a mess. But what a great story. It's really funny. I think it's funny anyways, because you know why? Because I there we go. History nerd. Alright, movies. So, movies of the time period, again, most of them are going to be escapist in nature, because people didn't have a ton of money. Films were like a nickel, 10 cents maybe, so it's a pretty cheap way for you to kind of lose yourself for an hour, couple hours, something like that. Diverting audiences from trouble. That's the escapist part of a lot of the films of the time. Now, the films themselves, for the most part, you know, they weren't kind of crazy, going out on the line, you know, to challenge the values of America, to challenge the culture or anything like that. So they're pretty conventional. You know, and one of the things also is that there was pretty tight censorship rules at the time, not just for film, but also for radio. But we will have some directors and writers that will want to explore the social issues of the day in terms of race relations, in terms of what was going on in rural areas, in just the government itself. But for the most part, we're looking at most films actually being more escapist, fun in nature. So here's a few films that are dealing more so with the social issues. So The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck actually came out as a book, and then it was turned into a film by a great director named John Ford. He did a lot of really cool westerns, like John Wayne westerns. Anyways, The Grapes of Wrath, as I mentioned at some other point in time, this was dealing with the Okies. This is the Joad family, that they are a family from the Dust Bowl who migrated into California, and the book and the movie in this case is going to explore the just blatant discrimination that the Okies are going to face once they get to California. And this does star, I don't know if any of you are film buffs, but this is a very young Henry Fonda. So Dealing with the Farmers. Oh, another great film. I used to show this when I taught government. This is a great film. This is Jimmy Stewart, if you know who he is. Again, very famous actor. So this is a film called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and I really like this, and you know, this would be something great to show today actually, because you know, we think about politics as being so corrupt, and essentially what goes on here is Jimmy Stewart plays this kind of, you know, naive green character where he thinks that politics can be run by people who are honest. So he ends up going to Washington, as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and what he finds out is that his state is run by a political machine, and that all of these politicians are so corrupt, and he feels he can't, he begins to feel that he can't do anything about the situation, but he perseveres. And it's a really good film, that it gives you a sense of hope and optimism that that our government, our democracy, that it can work, and it can work and not be corrupt at the same time. It's kind of naive, but it's a really good film, and Jimmy Stewart is just great. So this is Mae West. So when we look at gender issues, which is definitely a social issue from the time period, a lot of films in the 1930s will show females one of two ways. One way is the housewife, mother type of a character, and the other way was kind of the floozy. So Mae West tended to be the floozy. type of character, that she's seductive, she's very manipulative, she's after guys' money, stuff like that. So she did quite a few films, and if you look up films in the 1930s, you'll see that there are quite a few films that portray women like this, which is rather unfortunate. And I'm clicking and nothing is happening. Oh, there we go. Hey, for those of you who like musicals, musicals were super popular in the 1930s. I mean, talk about escape from reality. I mean, you think about like a musical, right? So you have this really like deep conversation where it's like, I went out, I tried to find a job, and I wandered the streets, and I couldn't find anything. And it was really depressing. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I came across John. And then John made things happy. So happy, Happy. I mean, sorry. That was a really bad version. That was my musical. What do you think? Anyways, so, I mean, what a great form of escapism. I mean, here you've got sometimes some kind of serious issues, and then all of a sudden it's just like, wee, fun, you know? And not all musicals are like that. I'm being totally facetious when I do that. But this song, or this musical, The Gold Diggers, was really, you know, about the excesses of the materialism and prosperity of the 1920s. So kind of going back to that idea. But yeah, I mean, musicals are a great form of escapism because it just, you know, that music, it just kind of gets you, yay, you know, and everyone's like, happy. Imagine if life was really like that. Oh my God. Oh, I love the Marx Brothers. I highly recommend that you guys watch something from the Marx Brothers. They're so freaking funny. So comedy, again, was something really popular with Americans during the Great Depression. Gosh, you know, people that you guys know of, like the late Robin Williams, if you know who Billy Crystal was, you know, or is, sorry, Billy Crystal's still alive. A lot of your, like, you know, comics, it's Steve Martin. All these guys were really influenced by the Marx Brothers. Groucho Marx, he's the guy in the middle here. I mean, my goodness, if you listen to some of his stuff, he was nasty for his time period, but super funny nonetheless. And then Harpo Marx, he played kind of like a mute, so he never spoke, and he always had a little horn and a wah 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 wah. And then Ciccolini over here, and I never remember this guy's name. Yeah, I don't remember. And most of the time, it's just the three. There's a great film called Duck Soup that they do, where it's a play on. They're making fun of the dictators of the time period. So Hitler, Mussolini, for those two for the most part. The film Duck Soup was actually banned in both Germany and Italy. It was a really good film. Snow White. Whistle while you work, and so on. This is cool. So Disney had been around for a while, actually, going back to the 20s. The first Mickey Mouse, Steamboat Willie, short-length cartoon came out, and then he started doing these full feature-length films. So Snow White is the first full feature-length animated, first full feature-length film. Say that 10 times fast. All right, let's see if I can get this right. All right, someone call me out if I'm wrong. Sleepy. Happy. Doc. Dopey. Grumpy. Bashful. Bashful, yeah. And Redness, Sneezy. Is there a Sneezy? Am I making that up? I don't know. Did I get that right? Do I have applause? So Snow White. This is where, you know, all you guys who are into, you know, animations and stuff, I mean, the Disney Studios, I mean, this is really where it all came from. And think about the development of, you know, this type of stuff that's being drawn on the cells, like hand drawn on the cells, to the computer technology today. And you guys like all the Pixar stuff, and I could be totally wrong with this, but does Pixar come out of Disney? I'm not really sure. And The Wizard of Oz. Yes. This is, God, such a great film. I hope all of you guys have seen this. It's so classic. Again, what a great form of escapism. You know, the wonderful Wizard of Oz and just getting away. Again, another musical. Gone with the Wind. So this is kind of set back during the antebellum period. It's a romance, as you can see from the photograph right there, or playbill. This film was super popular. The book also, Gone with the Wind, which I do believe came out in the 1930s as well, starring Clark Gable, who was a really famous actor for the time. But again, this romantic type of film. I think the film was like 3 hours. I have yet to sit through the whole thing of Gone with the Wind. Yeah, I get through some of it, but it's so long. But again, what a great form of escapism. Here you have all these problems. You go into movie theater for 3 hours. It's a love story. There's some other bad things about it as well, you know, because it is set in the antebellum South. But it's a, from what I've seen anyways, it's a good film. Not really my cup of tea, but I appreciate it. And then when it comes to writers, so writers for the most part are going to be dealing with the issues of social injustices of the 1930s. You will have some escapist type literature and stuff, but a lot of it is really social criticism. So you have Tobacco Road and Native Son dealing with like Mexican Americans dealing with African Americans and their situation. Again, The Grapes of Wrath with dealing with the rural situation. Dos Passos and USA Trilogy is dealing with just the ridiculousness of the materialism that came out of the 1920s. So your literature of the time period is very much so that social commentary in talking about social injustices of the time, in that, you know, like people are in their situation, like African Americans, for instance, that they're in their situation because of social situations, not necessarily because of themselves. Same thing with The Grapes of Wrath. Again, you look at these farmers, and their situation is not necessarily anything that they did in particular. It's the social situation of the time. Now, there are, again, like more of the escapist type stuff would be like magazines. So you have magazines that have like fashion, like I think Cosmopolitan came out in the 30s. Vogue was out by this time. Life magazine was super popular. This is a oh gosh, I don't remember what year this one was from. I want to say, oh, it's right there. It's behind me. You can't see it, but it says January. So this is from 1937. So this is 5 years into, that's Franklin Roosevelt. That's 5 years into his presidency. But the thing with Life magazine that was so cool was that, you know, there was a lot of social commentary with it because there were a lot of photographs of the situation of people, not just in America, but throughout the world. Super cool magazine. What else? You know, here's a couple things that you might find kind of interesting, because I think this is the last slide. It is. Games, like board games, were really popular in the 1930s, and there's a couple games that I'm sure all of you guys played at some point in time. And one of those was the game Sorry, and then probably the most popular board game that came out of the 1930s was Monopoly. You know, think about that. I mean, playing that board game Monopoly and you getting rich. I mean, that also is like another form of escapism. That here you are, you're making, you know, you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. You are gaining all this real estate. You're making a lot of money. You know, you can only dream, right? And that game kind of helped to facilitate that. So that's a little bit about the entertainment during the time period. Let's see if there's anything else that, what do we want to end this with? How about, oh, okay, hold on a second. Wait, who did? Hold on. I know you guys are like, I don't want to take your time up. But I gotta have like a song to end this. Oh, I don't see anything good here. Well, let's just put this on. This is Count Basie, who actually started during the 1920s Harlem Renaissance, but it's going to continue into the 1930s. So, hope you have a good evening. Yeah. Adios.